So I will take a more global approach, global in terms of UN and UNESCO and so on. And we decided when I was preparing for coming here to talk about two aspects, and then you will see them in the structure of my presentation. First, what are the structural challenges for global citizenship education? So global structural. And the second part would be what are the pedagogical challenges, more specific for the education field. So let's start with the structural ones. The first challenge, well, I dare to say problem, not only a challenge, is the global governance architecture. What do I mean? A few global tendencies first. Global citizenship education, well, it's about citizen. And we have a very clear paradigm shift. We don't talk about citizen anymore. I mean, we talk, but in many countries it's the rhetorics. What we have in the reality are consumers. Consumers are in the focus of most of activities around the globe, policy or financial, industrial, and the most of the financial efforts. They are focused on the consumer and not on the citizen. Or the followers, different kind of followers, being on Instagram or followers of the political parties and so on. And I would even say, I'm not sure about the proper English word, vassals or minions who are not the citizens. So that's the tendency. That's the tendency that influences us very much. Then the second one, it has directly to do with the governance of the world. UN, UNESCO, and other global players, World Bank, International Labour Organization, International Monetary Fund, they create a kind of a global governance. And we have a very clear shift or change of their mandate. And this shift does not include global citizenship education. Of course, if you read the documents, you will find it. But I'm not talking about what the documents are, what the documents are saying. International Council for Adult Education, and I personally as a researcher, we do a lot of this critical discourse analysis, meaning reading what's behind the document. Check what they're really doing and see what's really going on. So there is a very clear change on the mandate. Even education is not the mainstream anymore. So there is a real shift, and 3 days ago in China, I have heard the director of UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning who said, I'm quoting, in UIL, we were doing adult education and literacy. We are transforming more and more to lifelong learning and different paths or roads within the lifelong learning. And I think it's very dangerous, a very dangerous shift. The colleague just said, oh, there are many countries who don't know what's adult education, who don't know that. This is very true. But I see it even more dangerous that those global players, like UN and UNESCO, they don't want to have it anymore. And there is another tendency, very strong, about these corporate influences on the United Nations. When I say corporate influences, I mean directly financial influence, which change their agenda. And you can see very clearly, really mentioned every summer, we go every July, we go to New York to this high-level political forum to review how are we doing with these global goals and Agenda 2030. And you can clearly see how agenda is changed through the corporate influences. And I have put here one small data. UN is a huge body and very bureaucratic one, but still, compared to the global military expenditure that are $1.8 trillion, I don't know how many zeros it is, $1.8 trillion, global military expenditure and increasing. So UN entire budget is 1.8, approximately 1.8% of this world's military expenditure. It's nothing. It's peanuts. So UN is really weak. UN have only the power of the common values, of a common voice, of the citizen's voice. But that's changing. That's changing, and those who invest this 1.8 trillion, they also want to have the power within the UN. You know from the history, when UN was created, we said, one country, one voice. That was a progress. If you move to World Bank or to the OECD, $1, one voice. So UN is like one country, one voice. In 1992, Rio Plus big conference, there was this awareness. But come on, UN is not for the countries, it's for the people. It's for the citizen. So it's not enough to have the governments there. We want to have representatives of other groups. And they decided to create so-called major groups. NGO major group, women's major group, farmers major group, disabled people major group, and so on and so on. So there was a really nice tendency, an idea of multilateralism. We need different voices, not only the governments. The governments are unchanging, and well, we know how unstable they are in their values. But what we see now, starting like 2-3 years ago, and now increasingly, is that there is no voice of civil society, at least not so stable anymore. They say again, well, we are here only for the governments, and behind that, for the corporates. Big pharma, big sugar, big oil, big tobacco, and big alcohol. They sit around the table and they are counseling UN about, for example, health issue. Isn't it bizarre? But they do it very officially, very openly. Now I'm asking myself what they do behind the closed door, if they do this kind of things so very openly. So decreased role of civil society, not only in the countries like Hungary or my country, Serbia, or Philippines or Brazil, in the middle of UN, decreasing role of the civil society. Okay, the next challenge, also from the same context, are these global power relationships. And I will mention just a few because you know them, but I simply think we have to keep them in mind when we talk about global citizenship education. So, starting with UN, but we see it elsewhere. We used to have public space and global governance influenced by values. When UN was created, the value was, we need peace. We need some common values. Peace was one of them, equality of people, nations, men and women, and so on and so on. That's changed. And now we move to another kind of power, because values have power. Values had power. Now it's a moral power or financial and military power. And we see how they run the world. It's not a secret. So just check the globe. What's going on, country by country, region by region, and you will see that the world is moved by financial and military power, even in many developed countries. And then, of course, there is this increase of populism, extremism, especially right-wing extremism. We faced it daily. And this is, again, a very strong tendency. And I think we are not aware enough of what it means, and as the education sector, which will come additionally later, we do not offer a proper response to that. And something that I dare to call postmodern relativism. In adult education, we used to like postmodernism very much. You remember that was this learner-centered approach. And I, as a teacher or trainer, I don't have the whole truth. And everyone has his or her own truth. And all the participants, they have the right to express their opinion. Oh, it was so nice. We believed in that. But what postmodernism is bringing is also kind of ethical relativism. And if you hear Trump saying, you probably remember that, his inaugural speech, he said, there were never in any inaugural speech so many people on this big square as it was now. Next day, there were photos, Obama's inauguration, of course, there were much more people. Well, he was presenting alternative facts. That's the post-truth time. I hear it every day from my president and a few other countries, I don't even need to mention them. So there is this shift where science is also only one of the narratives. So you have, for example, organizations who believe that Earth is flat. They have their web page. They organize big demonstrations every year, thousands of them. And we might say, like in a postmodernistic paradigm, well, they have the right to their opinion. But then you have also right to say that some people are yellow, black, purple, white, whatever, more stupid or more clever than the others. How far does it go? Of course, it's a question of morals, of ethics. I'm not having an answer like that's where I would draw the line. But let's face it, that's the question. But we are not asking this question. Oh, this post-truth relativism, especially moral relativism. Then the next tendency, it has to do more with the marching neoliberalism, is a change in the development aid concept and practice. Of course, it's a part of economic architecture of the world, but it's a very worrisome one. Why do I put it in the concept of global citizenship education? It has to do very much also with the active citizens or with the violence on another hand, which has to do with the hate, lack of understanding, lack of tolerance, a lot of stereotypes and prejudices. So if you have extreme poverty, violence is usually one of the answers in many, many cases. So the global development aid, we developed countries are helping those poor people in the global south, that brings a very wrong message, and I will show you why in a few examples. I also call it as a kind of new colonialism or neocolonialism. It's different from what was in the past. The usual colonial exploitation of resources. Well, resources are cheap nowadays. Now it's done in a different ways. And I even dare to say that Eastern European countries are a kind of a new colony for, let me talk for my part of Europe, like Germany, Austria, Switzerland. They do it in a very subtle way, in a very nice way, with a very nice rhetorics, but we still keep the power relationships. We are not doing anything to change the global structure, and that's the danger for the citizens. So here are a few examples to illustrate this. First one, and I think that's the shocking one that you should keep in mind if you really want to think as a global citizens. Officially recorded capital outflows from developing countries. That means the money that goes from developing countries to the developed countries exceeds the money flowing to them. Africa receives around $30 billion a year and sends back around 192. There are different calculations depending on how do you define development aid. There are some researchers who put it in a very simple. When Africa receives $1, Africa sends $3 back to the developed countries. So there are many researchers proving that. I mean, 1 million more or less, but basically the relationship is there. So what kind of global citizens are we talking about here? Who is exploiting or supporting whom? If so much money flows from Africa, like we give Africa credit, we give them 10 millions and they have to pay 30 millions back. What kind of relationships are we creating? Let's take next one. The number of forcibly displaced people worldwide, around 60 million. UN data. Around 60 million. In 2013, there were more forcibly displaced people than in the Second World War. There was always migration, there will always be. But forcibly, people don't leave their home just like this. At least not this number of people. So what kind of world did we create that so many people are forcibly displaced? Number of the refugees, 20 million almost. Number of slaves, around 20 million. Slaves. When you say the word slavery, you probably think of the movies, and they bring, poor black people from Africa, they transport them in these big ships to USA or something. There is a modern slavery. Children, women, sex trafficking, people forced to work in awful conditions. There are documents taken. They cannot decide to move, to leave, or anything, no any rights. This is a kind of more modern slavery. 20 million. Another kind of data. People in India, there are far more people in India who have access to mobile phones, even 2 of them, than the toilets and sanitation. Think about what that means. Of course, I mean, for companies like Huawei or Samsung, well, lovely, great. But for citizens, toilets and sanitation, very basic things, they don't have access to that. There is another one that requires more complex sociological explanation, but I think you know what I'm into. China's middle class is now the biggest in the world. And we know middle class is the one that creates values and keeps the values. If China's middle class is the biggest of the world, what kind of values are we creating on a global level? I just came back 2 days ago from China. You cannot Google anything because Google is blocked. You cannot Viber or WhatsApp is blocked. Skype sometimes works, sometimes not. And they are very advanced in that, very, very advanced. And they're really happy with that. And you can also give them credit. They have lifted millions of people out of poverty. So you cannot say, uh-oh, you did wrong. But what was the price? So those people will create the values of the world tomorrow. They're everywhere. They're expanding in their industry. Look what they do in Africa. They are ruining the environment. We are here recycling, especially in Nordic countries. Oh, we do a lot in recycling. But you know, everything what you do is nothing, a piece compared to what one Chinese company is doing in Africa. No matter how much you recycle or you care for the environment, you cannot compensate even one company. I say Chinese, but there are the others as well. For example, Danish companies in Amazon forest and so on. And just to compare, the finance gap for the implementation of Education 2030 is annually 40 billion. For Education 2030, 40 billion. And remember, military budget, 1.8 trillion. And now a group of my favorite guys. You recognize them? Well, you probably recognize Mark Zuckerberg, or the Facebook guy. There is Bezos from Amazon. The one here is Zara, the owner of the Zara. Bill Gates, and a few others. Why do I put them here? Because I like them so much? Well, not really. Those 8 guys, those 8 men, this is not just an accident, they possess the same wealth as the half of the population, the lower half. This is Oxfam research. And again, the question, what kind of world do we live in? Of course, some of them, they give a lot in charity. The Bill Gates and Warren Buffett Foundation, they give for charity like $60 billion a year, or 65, I'm not quite sure, but approximately. How much they earn then, if they can give so much for the charity? And should we be glad? Oh, Bill Gates woke up one morning and said, oh, I would like to support farmers in Zambia or somewhere in Africa. Well, that's exactly what he did, supporting farmers in some Africa areas, because he thinks that's the best way to improve the world. Well, it's about structure, economic structure of the world we live in. How come so many people can earn so much money? We shouldn't live and be happy because of their generosity. But we should challenge the main economic structure. To put it in a different way or in the context, the world's wealth, 497 billionaires, and the annual amount required to fulfill basic human needs. When I say basic human needs, I mean water, basic food, toilet, sanitation. That's how much these guys have. And that's how much the world needs to reduce humiliation and extreme poverty. I think this chart speaks enough. Another comparison. This is from the Global Monitoring Report. Again, I'm using very formal data, official data, known data. So if you want to for every child in low and lower middle income countries to benefit from basic education, basically to have them in a school, there is a gap of $22 billion. If you say $22 billion, it sounds a lot. But put it in the context of military spending, 4.5 days. Keep the weapon silent for 4.5 days, and you will have all those children from the developing world in the schools and in basic education. Or 4% of US defense budget, because US is the most spender on military costs. Or half of the money spent on the Sochi Olympic Games. And they tell us there is no money for education. And now I come to the Agenda 2030 as a challenge. Why a challenge? Why is it's not a great factor? Why shouldn't we be happy to have Agenda 2030? Well, yes, we are. It's great to have a common framework. It's great to have a common goal. It's great to have something that 194 countries are committed to. Lovely, but there are also some problems there. Let's see what are the problems. Agenda 2030 is also very much criticized for its concept and approach. Let's take only a few things that are important for global citizenship education. So first one, it's very ambitious in measuring. We should measure. There should be statistics, there should be reports, how many percentage, how many people, measuring, measuring, measuring. All the statistics, all the quantitative approach. You might think those people, they have never been in they never studied some humanities. Hey, there is also qualitative research and data. No. They are completely ignored. We are back to this old research paradigm. Only numbers count. Only if it's measurable, that's important, that's count. So this is one huge problem in the agenda. The other one is this reporting. You remember Millennium Development Goals? There was no reporting. There was nice goals. One of them was about literacy, basic education, but there was no really system of reporting. Developing countries, they had to report, developed countries not. Big improvement. Now the developed countries have to report as well. But what's the problem? Every July we listen to them in New York. They come with the voluntary national reports, mostly sugar-coated, especially from the developing countries. A lot of tourism, you know, lovely country, we do everything, we do the best, it's great. Okay. And what about developed countries? It's a huge progress that also developed countries have to report. And they report about what they're doing, but they do not report about what they are not doing. They do not report about what they do abroad. There is no report about taxed illicit flows, which is one of the biggest problems in the world. Taxed illicit flows. And all what the companies are earning and developing countries are taken, and what they take from developing countries. They are not reporting about environmental problems they cause, their companies cause in other parts of the world. They are not reporting about how they export garbage to developing countries. Can you guess what US is doing with all this garbage? New York is producing 1 million tons garbage a year. 1 million tons. Where do they keep it? They don't keep it. They send it. Bangladesh, Pakistan, China. China just recently said no more US garbage. Well, I'm sure they will find another country, you know, for a few bucks to sell it. So developed countries are not reporting on that, and these problems are structural problems. And then again, the agenda is not only very much in this quantitative approach, but it's also not binding. Voluntary national report. They can report, they don't have to. Completely up to them. Civil society has to report. We have to do it all the time, regularly, but countries completely voluntary. When it comes to the implementation, It's forgotten. It's measuring, 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 measuring the progress. You know this old saying, if you have a pig, you will not make it grow faster by measuring, but by feeding it. Well, in this agenda, we're only measuring, we are not feeding. There are no implementation plans, some strategy and so on, but not really. There is no commitment. You don't see the commitment to the implementation. And as I mentioned several times, those structural problems are not challenged. They're still there. We only monitor and report what's on the surface and what are the results. We don't go to the roots. We don't go to the causes. Now I move to the second part, to the pedagogical challenges, things that are more specific for global citizenship education, because things that are related, those things are related to our field. And of course, I will not repeat here the whole SDG 4. But let me tell you, SDG 4 was accepted after the long fight. 2 years we have been fighting as a civil society to have a specific goal on education. They kept telling us, but education is everywhere. Of course you need education to achieve this and that. Why do you need a specific goal? And we knew if you don't have the goal, there will be nothing for that, especially not financial support. So, okay, we were glad to have the goal, but how it is structured, conceptualized, that's a problem. First, the understanding of education, and I find really good in a Fingo report, you mentioned it serves especially at adult education. Why GC is not there? Because it serves the industry. So the whole education is very much oriented to the needs of the labor market. Again, one of the tendencies that we see everywhere and every day. I'm not saying that's not important. Of course it is. And I have to say, very often I have some discussions with my colleague from civil society. No, vocational education, that's a dirty word, don't use it. No, no, no. Of course it's important. If you're unemployed, dependent on someone, long-term unemployed, there is no dignity, and we like to talk about the dignity, especially in civil society. So I'm not saying it's not important, but what I'm saying is it's very much reduced to that. Very much. The whole understanding of education is oriented to the satisfying the need of the labor market, or to be able to adapt to the changes. Adapt. Question the changes, question the tendencies, initiate the changes, no. There are changes. The fourth industrial revolution is going on. Digital world is expanding. We need to adapt, and that's what education should do. And again, this measurable, quantitative outputs, it's typical for the whole agenda, and of course for the SDG 4 as well. And then the lifelong learning. Well, what I'm going to say is probably a blasphemy, but I'm deeply convinced, and I simply want to share. When the whole idea of lifelong learning emerged, especially within UNESCO, we were really happy, because it was an expression of what we believed in. Especially for adults. They're independent learners. They have the right to learn, the dignity, the right to decide for themselves what they want to learn, how they want to learn. It's really learner-centered, and there is this continuity from cradle to grave. So we embraced lifelong learning, and it was a trap. It was a trap. And of course, I will now explain shortly, but if you need more information, I'm obsessed with collecting the evidences for that, because lifelong learning is a death of adult education, at least in this global space. UN, UNESCO, and UIL, as I mentioned, they did not only shift to lifelong learning as a concept. Adult education is disappearing. Check the documents. Title, Lifelong Learning. Go inside, you will see children, youth. If the adults are mentioned, it's usually in the sentences like, everyone should have right to education, adult, children, older people, and so on. Only rhetorically a few sentences. What is dangerous about that? When they transfer the policy, and that's what UN and UNESCO are doing, to the countries, they are sending them the message there is this concept of lifelong learning, and then you prioritize. How do they prioritize? Of course, children. Children are our future, of course. You cannot deny that. They are most important. So, you know, there are not enough resources, we have to prioritize no adult education. It's disappearing as a field of research, a field of profession. The sixth recommendation of this report, telling about including GCE in teachers training, well, sorry, that's only a dream, and I'm really worried about that. Teacher education is losing, not only teachers of adults and trainers, facilitators for adults, teachers education generally is losing support. Now we are back to this old-fashioned, you know, enthusiasm. Everyone who has some education and who's enthusiastic could teach, especially adults. Because you cannot have a profession in lifelong learning. Can you imagine someone who is able to work with very small children, children in school, teenagers, people who are 30, 50, and 80? No, of course not. Such a universal expert does not exist. But there is a good news. Robots can do it. Artificial intelligence, they can do it. I mean, that's how it was presented to us. So that's really a big problem, really big. This disappearing of adult education in the global agenda. Even UNESCO is supporting that, and I just said UIL did it very official. And of course, lifelong learning is missing some very important aspects. After insisting on peace, interculturalism, citizenship, they said, okay, you can have 4.7 here, and that's it. But you will not find those issues in any other, in targets, in indicators, and so on. Lifelong learning as a concept, as presented in the agenda, is ignoring all the unfinished businesses of MDGs. The fact that we did not achieve education goals of MDGs is ignored. Let's analyze why. Why did we fail? No. Oh, we have a new agenda, forget about the MDGs. And of course, real challenge is what are the causes? What are the reasons for that? UNESCO has published, beginning of this year, some estimation, they did some research, and they said, very clear message, we are not on track. We will not achieve education goals until 2030. And what happened? Nothing. We go on. We don't ask ourselves, okay, what was wrong? The concept, the means of implementation, the strategies, lack of financing, nothing. UNESCO came up with the data, so what? But UNESCO is also very weak, that's also what you should know. Very weak in the UN system. UNICEF is, for example, very strong. UNICEF has a huge office, not far from the UN headquarters in New York. They have a lot of money, they organize events, they have their people everywhere. UNESCO has a very small liaison office with 1.5 person, and they don't do much. So whatever they send or prepare in Europe, we hear about that, but on a global level, it's not very strong. Their message is far ignored. And what about literacy? No literacy. Literacy is not an issue anymore. We go to Africa. I was in the Pan-African conference. They were talking for 2 days. There was no literacy. So I asked some of the ministers of education, maybe I missed something. Have you solved the problem of illiteracy in Africa? Oh no, we have another priorities. Oh, please tell me, what are the other priorities? Indicators. Indicators of what? Quality indicators. Quality indicators of adult education system or education system in the countries who lack the basic infrastructure, in the countries where more than half of the population illiterate, 2/3 of them women. No, literacy is not an issue, especially adult literacy. One of the most ignored aspects in the whole agenda. And then you say, what about 800 million illiterate adults? UNESCO estimation, I think it's around 1 billion, but okay, let's say 800 million. What about them? You say no one left behind. They will be left behind. Well, we have to make priorities. And we focus on early childhood. And you know why? Well, the World Bank has a very good answer. Because the research is proved, if you invest in early childhood, those children are very good in performances on the labor market later in the life. Development, personality, forget about it. They will perform better on the labor market. And they are invited, these World Bank guys, they are invited to UN building to share this kind of researches. And no one is protesting. Of course, it's ICAE there in the last row, like, you know, they shut up. Sorry, no time for questions. So these are challenges related directly to our agenda. So you saw it in the first slide that really presented. It's a crowded target. You have all sustainable development, sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender, cultural peace, non-violence. It's impossible. They are all put in the 4.7, and there are no targets in the indicators on that. You clearly see that we were pushing hard, and in order to please us or to shut us up, they simply said, okay, here is a 4.7, and that's it. So, does it remind you of something? 4 pillars? UNESCO, of course, and four pillars of education. So what happened to the 4 pillars? Let's see. I would say that 3 pillars are almost dead and 1 is very much alive. Learning to be, personal development, oh, so old-fashioned. This is not something that you should mention in UN. This is so old-fashioned. Finally, you cannot measure it. How much I'm developed as a personality, who cares? You cannot measure it, so it does not count. Learning to be. Learning to know. You might think, oh, it's still accepted because schools are about that. Well, schools are, but adult education is not. Liberal adult education, don't mention it in UN, even not in UNESCO. UIL also, they have abandoned it. Knowledge, no. Knowledge is again old-fashioned. Liberal education, general knowledge, you cannot measure it, you cannot use it for the job, you cannot develop skills, so forget about it. Learning to do, skills, competencies, job-oriented, and of course, as very important for global citizenship education, learning to live together. Hardly mentioned. You saw a little bit in this 4.7, a little bit, but still, there are no indicators for that. If there are no indicators, it's not important. Like OECD, what they are measuring. We know literacy, science, and digital skills. You cannot measure love, sorry, no important. You cannot measure friendship, no important. So only the things that are measurable, they count. And there is, of course, a basic nature of global citizenship education per se, which makes it so difficult, so complex. And there is something, I dare to say, maybe missing in this report. GCE is about knowledge, it is about skills, but it's also about values. Nowadays, values are also old-fashioned term. You shouldn't use it, you should at least say attitudes. And I think that's what makes it so complex and so important. You can take any of the examples. Stereotypes, prejudices, hate, racial problems, and so on. Almost none of them is because of knowledge and skills, but because of the emotions, because of the attitudes or values. That's why it's so difficult to do global citizenship education, especially among adults. They already have their structure of knowledge. So you have to have the constructivist approach and deconstruct a little bit and create a new building. Very difficult task. But I think we should never forget about this. Bring people who are, who hate other nations, who are extremist right, give them a great lecture on how important it is to be tolerant and inclusive and so on. Make them do something, develop the skills and send them out. They will remain the same because their values did not change. Does it mean we should give up teaching values? I don't think so, although it's difficult, I admit. It requires multi-actors approach. What do I mean by multi-actors? So it's not only about teachers and trainers. You must have a television, media, newspapers who do the same. If you teach in schools or adult education centers tolerance and peace, and in television every day you see war against migrants, war against neighbors or whoever, that's what I see in my country, forget about it. Schools or adult education will not be able to make it alone. So you need everyone in the society, or the majority of the players, to do the same, to work on the same goal. So even best teachers cannot help if they are alone. But you really need good teachers. So that's why I think the sixth recommendation is a crucial one. And that's why I think in the global world you cannot talk about teachers' education. They don't like it. They would like to replace teachers with online programs, MOOC platforms, and so on. Because you really need a good teacher to take people out of the comfort zone, to challenge stereotypes, to challenge prejudices, to shake the value system, the existing value system, and to help people to create a new one, a better one, a more inclusive one, a tolerant one, and so on. You really need the great facilitators to do that. And it's not like only nice teaching and lecture and there are some textbooks. You really need the best facilitators who will have a range of knowledge and skills, and they themselves also being convinced, being tolerant and inclusive and so on. And doing in the methods that will go under the skin, really under the skin, shake people. What we are also missing is the lack of authentic pedagogical, and I have to say I use more andragogical because it's about adults, andragogical paradigm. What do I mean by that? Look how we exchange. We don't talk about education so much. We talk, especially in Europe, about reskilling, upskilling, unskilling, or skilling, or whatever. European agendas are about skills. And skills are imported from the world of economy. This is not authentic pedagogical andragogy, not education paradigm. We don't talk about education strategies, but skills agenda. European policy is about skills agenda, skills intelligence, skills, there are skills detectives who should find out what skills people are missing and so on. Education strategies, no. Of course we don't talk about people, but about human resources. And our language and our paradigms are full of performance, effectiveness, results, outputs, input, output, measurement. This all comes from the world of economy. And we have accepted it. We have embraced it without critically reflecting, saying, maybe for vocational education, maybe for some groups, certain situation, but not for the whole education sector. But we accepted it for whole education sector. So, and the most important one, this would be also my most important message. Global citizenship education in the modern world should not only react to what's going on and make people aware, but help them to understand why, going to the roots and going to the causes. I think in adult education, we are not giving the wrong answers, but we are asking the wrong questions. Why do I put those migrants group here? That's the photos from my country. We ask the question, what could we do for the migrants? How can we help them? Okay, we can help them, we can with the housing, in education, we can help them to integrate. We can offer them the courses, language courses and similar things. That's what I've heard in Germany, that's what I heard in Sweden. We are helping migrants. My message is, sorry, that's not what you should do. I mean, you should, but that's not the most important task of education. The most important task and the question of education is, why is it happening? Why are so many people from Syria coming? Oh, there is some war there and, bombing. Oh, really? Who is bombing whom and why? And what is your government doing in that? Is your government involved? Did you check with your government? How come they are spending the money on the military planes? Did they ask you as a citizen if you want to join that or not? So when people come from Syria or any other part of the world, when they come, the problem is already there, it's done. So we should think about causes and rules. And I think that's the most important task of adult education today, in order to prevent this. As I said, there will be always migration, but in order to prevent non-wanted migrations, forced migrations. What have we done to prevent it, or what have we missed to do? Do we teach about that in adult education? Mostly not. We are very busy in helping migrants. Fine, but that's not our main task. You can take any of the problems, global problems, and I think you will come up with the same answer. I said refugees or global financial crisis. What was the answer to the global financial crisis? Gosh, we need financial literacy. Courses on financial literacy. Why? Well, you go to the bank and they offer you a very bad contract. You should be clever and realize, they're trying to cheat me. Well, sorry, who caused the global financial crisis? Those people in the banks and hedge funds, and so especially the big banks, they lacked some skills and competence. Oh no, they were very skilled. They lacked something else. They were lacking some values. So what was our answer? We need more skills in order to stop them cheating us. No, the causes are the system that enabled them to do what they were doing. Greek crisis. Oh, I had a lot of discussion with my Greek friends and colleagues. You know, oh, poor them. I said, sorry, you have failure in adult education. You know, it's a privilege to live in Europe. In spite of all the problems, it is still the most comfortable part of the world. And in Greece, you have additionally this lovely weather and great beaches. So, sorry, you have a responsibility. You cannot go to the elections every 4 years and that's it. No, you have to question your government, whatever they do. When they took these big loans from the German banks, did you ask them what for? They were buying the fleet, the ships and so on, submarines. Did you ask them why? No, because you got certain salary, you got some additional privileges and so on. Oh, it was so nice and comfortable. And then finally, you had the bill. Now you're paying the bill. The same in Germany. Germans believed, oh, we are helping those lazy Greeks. We are saving the lazy Greeks. Sorry, no, you're saving the German banks, because they have profited from that. So on the both sides, I mean, I'm taking Greek and Germany, but you can, of course, expand. On both sides, you saw the failures in adult education. To really raise awareness about what's going on, understanding, and of course, preventing impossible. Economic growth, resiliencies. I will not talk much about sustainable development. It's very fashionable now. It's very known. There are many of data. But one of the answers to climate change, we need to increase resiliencies. Oh, really? People have to react. People have to be prepared. Because we cannot change global industry. Economic growth, no, it's must. Economic growth, yes, we don't touch it. That's sacred. That's the holy cow. We don't touch it. So in this sense, in adult education, we shouldn't allow to give only remediate, only answers like how to mild the situation. There is the author, Grattan, who said in his book, In Quest of Knowledge, he was interpreting the decline of the Roman Empire. He said, that's the failure of adult education. They missed, through adult education, to include so-called barbarians or other nations, other people, on the periphery of the Roman Empire. So they haven't made them citizens of the Roman Empire. And this is one of the reasons for the decline of the Roman Empire. I hope it won't be the end of the decline of European Empire. One additional problem is also, I here put, of course, you recognize, first one is Arab Spring, and the second one is Occupy Wall Street. This is the good old pedagogical question. What is the goal? What for? We knew clearly against what, but not what for. And this is the case with many movements around the globe. You know about the World Social Forum. And I know many colleagues from Finland are very much involved in that, really contributing, trying to find the answer. Not only, okay, movements, millions of people are in the World Social Forum, but some Finnish colleagues, some institute and researchers, they are helping in in conceptualizing the democracy that is not traditionally representative democracy, but new kinds of. It did not work. We don't know what are we fighting for. We only know what we are fighting against. So how can you do the education if you don't have the clear goal? And this is, of course, an issue for global citizenship education. And finally, the last problem, again, a blasphemy. To say that you're against ICT today is really blasphemy. Well, of course, I'm not saying I'm against ICT. We all depend on that. But you know, majority of us, we belong to the generation who wasn't born with a mobile phone in the hand or with a computer on our table. We developed our values, our behavior, a way to acquire knowledge. We developed it a different way. So we might be more or less dependent, but computers and mobile phones are not shaping our mind setting. But it is going on with our children or grandchildren. So the problem is that digital skills are seen as a deus ex machina, magical solution, silver bullet for all educational problems. In global citizenship education, especially no. Can you think of a course, online MOOC platform, any application, to teach people to be tolerant and to leave prejudices, to teach Serbs not to hate Croats or the other way around? I don't know of such a course, and I know of anyone who would subscribe. Usually these online forums and platforms are the school of hate. If you only read the comments under some YouTube videos, you will see it. So there are certain things that you cannot teach on the online. Many things you can. Global citizenship education, mostly not. And the world does not suffer because of lack of skills and competencies. The world suffers because of a lack of peace and tolerance, because there is hate, there are conflicts, because of economic interest. Finally, war is the best business, probably. So that's what we cannot change on online platforms and MOOCs. So instead of, for global citizenship education, have more research in learning psychology. How can we fight the prejudice and stereotypes? What methods can we use? How can we approach social, emotional part of the human being as a teachers? What kind of curriculum, what kind of methods? Instead of that, we need skills of the fourth industrial revolution and artificial intelligence. That's the last hit in UN. Robots will do everything. They replace, and I'm not exaggerating, they started already in Liberia. World Bank is supporting the project. I mean, Bill Gates will send a few thousand computers. No, he already did. And that's what they do now in Liberia. Teachers have tablets. The program is there. They only have to read it loud, and the children have to repeat. Now the 4 categories are, and then the children repeat. Now the 4 categories are, and so on and so on. Because teachers are stupid. And anyway, to teach the teachers requires too much time. It's too expensive and too much time. So slowly they could be replaced by tablets and computers. That's going on. It started already. And what do I ask? What do I offer at the end? Of course, I have to offer some thoughts on what are the ways out, or how can we change, improve. Sana was telling very nicely, and I would support it very much. We need new kind of solidarity and cooperation. Not this old-fashioned solidarity, oh, poor them, you know, in those poor countries, and we help them. No, it's solidarity based, we are all in the same boat. And solidarity, like what's happening there, it has to do with us. We take the part of responsibility. So a new kind of togetherness, new kind of cooperation. Abandoning this old, let me say, neo-colonial paradigm. We need to stick together, countries, organizations, and movements that are committed to education, to global citizenship education. When there is something in UN that we do not like, or this is emerging, last year, Russia didn't want to have woman or gender in the final document. They said, there is UN woman. Why should, in sustainable development, why we should have women? God. USA, they didn't want to have any mentioning of trade, international trade. No, no, no. This is an economic issue. It's not part of this. Israel was, of course, against education in occupied territories. No, no, there are no occupied territories, at least not in Israel. Then some colleagues from some countries were against human rights. They said, human rights are done in Geneva. In New York, we don't talk about human rights. So what we did, we gathered the countries, no matter government, civil society. There was Canada, almost all Nordic countries, a few others, Australia and so on. They prepared the final document and they read it on the final day of this big meeting. Like, we want women, we want gender, we want, human rights and so on and so on. And finally, we convinced them, everyone, including Russia, except USA. USA and Israel were the only one who did not vote, but still. So, stick together. It's not about, as in old times, governments and civil society. We are either on the one side of this paradigm or on the other side. And we need to stick together. We all who believe that education is still important and global citizenship education. Very much I would values, or attitudes. I think it's very much missing, and I think it's on purpose. We shouldn't forget that, especially in GCE. As I said, asking the right questions, not only giving the answer how to repair what was done, but going deeper. Rethinking the paradigms, the structured processes relationship, rethinking again the structure that caused the problems. Not only giving the medicine for the consequences. Step out of the moment and of time and step out of the space and geography. This is global citizenship. Think about how was it in the past, what we don't want to be repeated, and things are repeating, unfortunately. Learn from the history. And then this common feeling also, broader, not only being aware of what's going on in other parts of the world, but make it our reality, because it is. We can switch off television and be closed in our room. There will be something knocking on tomorrow on our doors, either a migrant or a climate change or Trump personally. Gosh, what a nightmare. And finally, act. And that's it. Thank you.